As I said last week, we're spending 2 weeks in the introduction to this book of Ruth, because there's quite a bit of background of its place in the Bible and its historical setting that we need to know to really appreciate the just the wonder of this beautiful little story. I encourage you, if you haven't yet, to read the book of Ruth through from beginning to end, so you get a sense of the whole picture. Now, we're not told exactly when the story of Ruth happens, where it fits, apart from that it was during the time of the judges, and that she was 3 generations before David. Now, David was born about 1040 BC. And she was his great-grandmother, so you could try and do the maths and work your way back. If we read literally this genealogy, this short genealogy at the end of the book, we also see that Boaz was the son of Salmon, who, according to Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, Salmon married Rahab, the prostitute who had hidden the spies just before Israel entered the land in Joshua 2. She had been brought into Israel through that act of faith and because of her faith. But even then, we can't really pin down dates because we're not told, firstly, what age these people were when they had their children, and also because Hebrew genealogies don't always include every single person in the family line as we do. They often highlight the significant members of the family tree. And that explains, as a side note, why if you read the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew and the one in Luke, there's some differences between them, not because one is wrong and one is right, but because of this, they highlight the significant members in the family tree, and there may actually be a number of generations between each name. But the most probable time that this story fits into the story of the book of Judges is what we've just read, the time of Eglon, King Eglon of Moab, and Ehud, the judge. Eglon was the king of Moab, as you can see in that map there, southeast of Israel. And as we heard, he invaded and took control of Israel for 18 years with his base in Jericho, which then was, which then was known as the City of Palms. After 18 years, then, we heard the people cried out, the Lord raised up Ehud to deliver Israel from Moab in that wonderful story that we heard read. We heard it read in the NIV, which was slightly sanitized. You may have seen that, or heard the NIV said that the sword came out his back, but actually what it said was the excrement came out. So in case you missed it, when Eglon died by being stabbed by Ehud, his bowels released their contents. And that's why his servants thought he must be relieving himself, because that's what it smelled like. And so they waited to the point of embarrassment. The last thing you'd want to do is interrupt your king while he's sitting on the toilet. Let's consider the scene that's being set here then. The Israelites, they would have understood very clearly that the famine that they were experiencing to be not a product of natural climate or politics, but the doing of the Lord in his act of discipline towards them. See, alongside the covenant curses that they were promised for disobeying the Lord, alongside the curse of being conquered by your enemies, the Lord had also told them that disobedience and idolatry would bring unfruitfulness to the land, and that would lead to famine. He also promised unfruitfulness of the womb. So it's reasonable to think, then, that the oppression by Moab coincided with this drought and this famine. And it also helps explain why Elimelech and Naomi and their family lived in Moab for 10 years. Because if Moab is ruling, then you would be able to travel to Moab because it was under the same king. It also explains why their two sons and their wives had no children during that 10 years of being in Moab, unfruitfulness of the womb. So we have Eglon the Moabite ruling over the people of Israel who are going hungry under this famine, while he's sitting there morbidly obese in his palace. Even that adds to the ignominy of Israel's judgment. Not only are they ruled over by a foreigner, but this foreigner is a debaucherous glutton. That's probably why they were experiencing famine, because he was demanding tributes. All of the grain being harvested would have been shipped off to him in Moab. The wicked are prospering while God's people are languishing. But then we also see the justice of God on this wicked man. His lavish but short-lived glory was matched in height by the lowness of the disgrace in which he died, wallowing in his own feces while his servants were outside embarrassed by the stench. Now, eventually, the people of Israel are going to demand a king, a human king, but not just any king. They want a king who is like the kings of the nations. Did they realize what they were asking for? And here we have a portrait of one such king of the nations, highlighting the foolishness of Israel in thinking that they would be better off under a government modelled by the world's systems rather than on God's law. Do they really want a king like Eglon, a selfish glutton, who has no regard over those over whom he rules, and who then dies an embarrassing and disgraceful death? Is that the kind of king you want, Israel? There's another implied narrative behind what appears to be just this matter-of-fact account in Ruth 1:1-4. We're supposed to ask the question, given this context, why would Elimelech choose to move to Moab? Now, the surface answer is, well, there was no food in Judah, in Israel, and he went to where the food was. He was concerned for the well-being of his family, but it wasn't as simple as that. According to that genealogy, this is only the second generation after those who had conquered the land under Joshua. And the Lord had made it clear to Israel at that time that this land was to be their inheritance. It was a land that depended on the Lord for its rains, for its provision. And so they were told to be bold and courageous and to take the land with the promise that future generations would find rest in the land. So getting up, leaving his property, his inheritance behind, and taking his whole family out of the land was a demonstration that Elimelech truly was of this generation. We're told in Judges 2, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, the ones who'd come in, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So rather than returning to the Lord in repentance and trusting him to remain faithful to his promises, even in the midst of his wrath being poured out, Elimelech considered it would be better off, that they would be better off to throw their lot in with the Moabites and the gods of the Moabites. His name literally means God is king. Instead, he went to live in a land that was ruled by the Moabite god Chemosh. In the biblical world, it was a popular belief that one nation's victory over another wasn't just a human victory, that it mirrored fighting that was taking place in the heavens, and that it represented a victory of one nation's gods over the other nation, the conquered people. So the Moabites at this time would have been celebrating the humiliation, as far as they saw it, of Yahweh at the hands of their god, Chemosh. Now, of course, the Lord shows that thinking is false through the Bible. He states very clearly that when other nations defeat Israel, they're only able to do so because he's given them over into their hands in judgment. He is the ruler over every nation, over every so-called God, and they all do his bidding, and they do just what his hand had predestined for them to take place. So Elimelech's actions, they're more than just about getting food and work. They are actually a defiance against the Lord and against his promises. It could be included along with the stories in the concluding chapters of Judges and the final verse of Judges. So the verse just before Ruth 1 verse 1 is Judges 21:25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Do we ever throw our lot in with the world because we don't trust God's promises? Do we make our decisions based purely on what we see as best for our economic security, our financial security, or whatever? Elimelech probably thought we're going to be better off going to Moab. Well, what happened? He died. His two sons married Moabites, forbidden by the law, and then his sons died. Was his family better off through that decision? Now, the author of Ruth paints a picture of the opening scene, not just by stating the facts of what happened, but by the way they deliberately mention and place the names of people and places in this story. In biblical stories, the names of people aren't just mere coincidences. The providence of God is behind a parent's choice of the name for their child. It's not that giving a child a certain name will then determine their destiny. That's a pagan notion, that a name in itself contains inherent power over a person. But you could imagine how if you have a name and you hear that name over and over again from childhood, that it could shape your thinking and your sense of your destiny and identity. So let's look at some of these names. The first names are those of places. So Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of bread, probably reflecting that it was had a significant role in the agriculture of the region. There were actually a number of towns in Israel called Bethlehem. It was a small town at this time, but it was big enough to be a walled town, as we'll see, as Boaz sits at the gate. It would have been a place where the grain would have been kept secure from raiders and where it would have been stored up to withstand famine. But this time, the house of bread doesn't have enough to withstand this famine. And our English translations portray the famine in a passive sense. There was a famine in the land. But the Hebrew writes it in an active sense. It portrays the famine like an invader. And that reinforces this notion that famines weren't the consequences of meteorology. They were the hand of God in judgment. But no level of sufficiency in Bethlehem, the house of bread, would be enough if the Lord had determined that there would be a famine. We're also told that this is Bethlehem in Judah, which distinguishes it from the other Bethlehems that were in Israel at the time, but also then links it to the tribe of Judah and the expectations of this tribe that were based on Jacob's blessing of Judah, his fourth son. Let's hear it. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. So very clearly, Judah is this tribe out of which will come a king for Israel, verse 8. And we're told in verse 10 that his rule will extend wider than just Israel to all people. Clearly, it's not just foretelling David's kingship, but this messianic hope for the world. Then verses 11 and 12 paint this picture of abundant prosperity and health, where vines can be used as hitching posts, where wine is as plentiful as water, that you wash your garments in it. People's eyes and dental health is perfect. But now, this homeland of the king is nowhere near this promise being fulfilled. There's no king in the land. The people are oppressed by a foreign power, and a famine threatens the lives of the people, let alone their dental health. Then from Bethlehem in Judah, we're taken to Moab. It's not so much the meaning of the word, but all of the negative associations that it has. Now, Moab was a person. He was the father of the Moabites, and he was the son of the incestuous pregnancy of Lot and his firstborn daughter. We can read that in Genesis 19. That was a sordid ending to the story of a man to whom the Lord had shown so much kindness that his daughters got him drunk and tricked him and became pregnant by him. Then, along with trying to curse Israel through Balaam as they were travelling through the land, the Moabites refused to provide bread and water to the Israelites as they were heading towards Canaan. So now this man is fleeing from a place for the provision of bread, Bethlehem, the promised place of the origin for the king, which is now impoverished, and is fleeing to a place known for withholding bread, but which is now prospering. Then the author tells us the names of the family, which, as he tells them, paints the same picture that's given by the names of the places. So, as I've said, Elimelech means God is king, and he's married to Naomi, which means pleasant. And that could be a shortened version of the longer name Naomi Yahu, meaning Yahweh's kindness. They're a picture of the Lord who is king, married by covenant love to Israel, his bride, who had been given a pleasant land to live in, a land of milk and honey. At least that's the ideal picture based on Israel remaining faithful to their covenant obligations. But they have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Mahlon means sick, and Chilion means destruction. Now, it's more probable that the author is saying that this is what these sons came to be known as. It was their nicknames because of what happened in their short lifetimes. Their actual birth names are forgotten. Their real identity is lost, replaced with suffering and loss. It's very unlikely that a Hebrew mother would name her children sick and destruction. They're a bit like the children of Hosea. You know the story. He has 3 children. The first is called God Will Scatter. the second is called No Mercy, and the third is called Not My People. Names that communicate what seems to be the failure of the covenant and the forsaking of the Lord of his people in his wrath. So this family serves as a picture of Israel, the unfaithful bride of the Lord, facing his judgment, ending up in dire circumstances in which the question is, will the covenant's promises of the Lord, will they prevail despite the sin of his people? Or will the people be lost forever? Then we are introduced to the two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Now, we can't be too dogmatic about the meaning of their names, because most likely these are Hebrew versions of their Moabite names, whatever their Moabite names meant. Maybe they're names that their husbands gave them, or that the writer of the story gave them in light of their actions. Orpah sounds like the feminine for the word for neck, which is related to the word for turn, because the neck's job is to turn the head either way. That points forward to when she will turn away from her mother-in-law and return to her homeland and her family. Ruth sounds like the Hebrew for friend or companion. And that points with her decision to remain with Naomi and to go with her to Israel. So we can see them as the two choices that Naomi will face when her husband and her sons are gone. Does she remain turned away from her people and from the Lord? Or does she return to a place of faithfulness with her people? Now, having said all that about the names, we've got to be careful that we don't head down the allegorical path. One commentator I read of the book of Ruth tries to map the story of Ruth onto a future prophetic timeline of Israel and the church in the end times. And he's surprised that no other Bible scholar in the last 2,000 years has ever seen what he's discovered. Sometimes we are called to view a passage in this way, in an allegorical way, that this thing represents something else. But unless we're explicitly told by the scriptures to take it that way, we should avoid treating it like the Chronicles of Narnia or a newspaper cartoon. See, allegory, what allegory does is it uses fictionalized images to represent, to decode historical or moral or political realities. But that's not the biblical model. The biblical model is one of type and shadow, in which actual historical events, real figures in history, real people, which in themselves give a spiritual and practical significance for those who are there observing the events or who are reading about it in the scriptures. But it also points forward to a future action of God in history in a way that is relevant to all people at all times. What makes the type or the shadow point forward is, while it communicates an ideal, that's insufficient or incomplete in itself. And so it forces us to look forward to a future fulfillment. So we should see in these names and their meanings, it's not a teaching framework, it simply hints to us that these are not just historical events and people. We should see that behind this is the sovereign hand of the Lord, who is guiding and directing everything in order to bring all things to his goal that will be realised in Jesus. They're like signs along the highway that tell us we're travelling in the right direction for our destination. Now, to skip to the end of the book, we can also get some insights from this genealogy. and they're worth noting because they also give us a bit more background to the book. We discover that Boaz is descended from Perez. Perez was the fourth son of Judah, just like Judah was the fourth son of Jacob. Not only that, but he was the child of Tamar, the widow of his older brother She had disguised herself as a shrine prostitute in order to seduce Judah and to have children by him. And she did this because Er's brother Onan had refused to fulfill his obligation as kinsman redeemer and to marry her and have children on behalf of his brother. So while he married Tamar, we're told he wasted his semen on the ground to prevent her from having children. He didn't fulfill what was his obligation under the law. Then, when Judah's third son was old enough to marry, he didn't give her to him in marriage. So there's this ongoing family history of a failure to observe the laws about marriage, about kinsman redeemers. Boaz then puts an end to that history by keeping them. Now, the story of Tamar and Judah, they have echoes of Lot and his daughters. A man made drunk, tricked into fathering children through a forbidden union, out of which we saw the Moabite people came. As a result of that breaking of the law, the Moabite people were there. The difference, though, is that Judah had greater moral accountability because he wasn't made drunk. He knowingly went to have relations with what he thought was a pagan shrine prostitute. So Perez, like Moab, was a product of a sexual crime which the law demanded the penalty of death for the father. Now, a Jew who knew their scriptures might ask, well, hang on, Judah committed this crime. The law said he should have been put to death. Is this iniquity for which Judah, the father, went unpunished, is it going to be visited on his children and his children's children to the third and fourth generation, as Exodus 34 says? Or will this multi-generational cycle of sin be broken, maybe by the actions of a righteous man? And then we see Boaz. That's the story of the human race, isn't it? Generational sin. The sins of the father, Adam, visited on his children, not just to the third and fourth generation, but to thousands of generations. When Adam sinned, we were all made sinners. We are all in Adam, and we have his sin visited upon us because we too have sinned and we're guilty. We need this cycle of sin that's passed from generation to generation to be broken by one righteous man. And we see that righteous man is Jesus Christ, who broke that cycle. Now, the circumstances of Perez's birth are also significant. Let's read them. When the time of her labour, this is Tamar's labour, came, there were twins in the womb. And when she was in labour, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterwards his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. See how Perez is a bit like Jacob. Remember Jacob and Esau wrestling together with in the womb. Who's going to come out first and claim the birthright? So just as Jacob took the birthright from his older brother Esau, Perez is trying even from birth to usurp his brother's birthright. So while he's the fourth born chronologically, He's actually the last when it comes to inheritance. He's the least likely to be the one to carry the line for the promised king from the tribe of Judah. Or at least that's according to our human standards. Throughout the biblical story, that promise of the seed of the woman, of the seed of Abraham and of Eve, it doesn't come through firstborn sons like Cain or Ishmael or Esau or Reuben. It always comes through younger sons. And the reason for that is clear, because the promise is not according to the flesh, but it's according to the promise. It is written, Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman, one by a free woman, but the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. The Lord is constantly, through the biblical stories, upsetting the human expectation for inheritance by picking the least likely son to be the heir. Now that's significant for us, because while we are not children of Abraham by the flesh, in that sense we are the last born instead of the firstborn, we are still heirs of the promise through faith. Now you, brothers, are like Isaac, children of the promise. One more little bit of digging. When we do some more digging, we find that the writer of 1 Chronicles, when he gives the genealogy, he highlights the breach between Perez and his brother Zerah, and he adds some commentary to the genealogies. See how he says that the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul, and then the sons of Zerah, Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara, 5 in all. The son of Carmi, so I'll keep reading. The son of Carmi, Achan, the troubler of Israel, who broke faith in the matter of the devoted thing. Then the sons of Hezron that were born to him, Jerahmeel, Ram, and Chelubai. Ram fathered Amminadab, and Amminadab fathered Nahshon, prince of the sons of Judah. So Zerah's descendant Achan is the troubler of Israel, who hid those devoted items from Ai, and he put Israel's inheritance of the land under threat. But Perez's descendant Nahshon, the grandfather of Boaz, he's called a prince of the sons of Judah. Again, pointing to the fact that the promise of the king had come through Perez instead of the older brother Zerah. Now, all of this background, what does it show us? Show us that this story of Ruth, it's not just about a widow being brought into a family. It's not just about a foreigner being brought into Israel. It's about the redemption of a whole family line, beginning with men who fathered children by unlawful unions, continued with this rivalry between sons, bloodlines culminating in traitors, and apostate families who leave the land and throw their lot in with foreign gods. This is, as we heard earlier, this is the gospel that is much bigger than say a prayer, get your ticket to heaven when you die. This is God's redemption of the whole world. It is all in preparation. This redemption, not just of Ruth and Naomi, but of Judah's whole family line. It's all in preparation. It's all getting ready for the coming birth of the promised King, the Messiah in Jesus.